introduce this session's speaker. Chris Meyer teaches at York Mills Collegiate in the Toronto District School. During his 19-year career, Chris has transformed the way he teaches, moving away from traditional lectures to inquiry-based learning using cooperative group work. Chris has written extensively about teaching and has presented pedagogical workshops for high schools and universities across Southern Ontario. His classroom resources are used throughout the TDSB across Canada and the United States. He is the winner of the 2016 Canadian Association of Physicists Award for Excellence in Teaching High School Physics in Ontario and the 2015 TDSB Teaching Excellence Award. He is currently the Vice President of Teaching and Learning for the Ontario Association of Physics Teachers. Please visit his website to explore his school's teaching resources for physics, chemistry, grade 10 science, and to watch videos of his classes in action. So, if you're Chris Meyer, take yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and welcome. It's a real treat to be speaking with you folks today. And when I was putting this presentation together for the first time, I was talking with friends and colleagues, and the advice that I was getting was, ixnay on is ixnay. And I thought I would deal with that right from the top, because I am a physicist. And the life of a physicist is not entirely filled with glamour, especially when it comes time for the cocktail parties. Because the same thing plays over and over again. Inevitably, you start chatting with people, oh, what do you do, and so on, and oh, I'm a physics teacher. And the reaction is always the same. You get, wow, physics, eh? Or sometimes you get, oh yeah, I like physics, but I did very badly. A lot of negative experiences associated with physics. But deep down, we feel physics is awesome. And if you think about the contributions physics has given to our world and our understanding, we can image individual atoms, we can explain or tell the story of the universe over 14 billion years. We can create little devices called transistors, which are the backbone of modern computers. We can create lasers, the backbone of modern communications. And physicists created the World Wide Web, the backbone of modern procrastination. And so we deep down feel that physics is awesome. But what about physics teaching? Well, when you think of physics teachers, you're probably not thinking of, oh, captain, my captain, Carpathian. You're probably thinking something more like this. But what we think, when we think about physics teachers, is, oh, thanks, Eric. So we have thought, oh yeah, things are awesome for physics teachers. But we've thought that despite a lot of difficulties in our teaching, and just in case you're wondering, this guy is going on and on about physics and so on. Pride always comes before the fall. So as physics teachers, we've been thinking that this is awesome for years and years, despite the huge dropout rate from our physics courses, being the least popular in high school. And despite the appalling lack of gender diversity in our physics classes. So despite these things that we've been telling ourselves, oh, awesome. And so what was it that finally burst our bubble? Well, it was a test. A test of 30 multiple choice questions called Force Concept Inventory. Now, the questions looked harmless enough. They took out all the math, all the tricky math in the questions, so it looked like a slam dunk. But, well, here's one example of these questions. So, swinging a ball in a circle around our heads, and at a moment of time, the string breaks. right at this moment here, the string breaks. And the question is, in what direction does the ball travel? So, I promise you, this will be the only physics question that I ask you today. So, I'd like you to turn to a neighbor and discuss. So, in what direction will the ball travel? You have 30 seconds. Go. Ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to congregate around some tables, so if you need a neighbor to discuss, please feel free to move. All right. Now, I'd like to hear from you folks. Just shout it out together. In what direction will it go? The answer is B. Yeah, the answer is B. Great, great. You're doing really well today. That's awesome. But if you give these questions to, an old, crusty physics teacher, they'll look at them and say, oh, these questions are so easy. But if you give them to real life students, well, we discover something very interesting. So, if you give them the 30 questions at the start of your course, they might score something like this, 45%. That's kind of a typical result. And so that leaves room 55% for their improvement because of your fantastic teaching. And then, if you give them the exact same 30 questions at the end of your course, what do they get? This is a very typical result. So they have only improved by 12.7%. Or this is the number that the education researchers like to share. If you take that 12% and you divide it by the 55, we call that the gain. This is the measurement of how much they improved. And that gain, 23%. So that's a measure of how effective your teaching is. So let's put that into perspective here. Because if you take your typical student, and you are transmitting, you're sending your best physics knowledge and understanding towards them. Now we know 23% is sticking. And what's happening to the remaining 77%? That's being scattered as heat in Star Trek trivia, who knows what. But this is a very robust result. This result of 23% applies to high school teaching, university teaching. It applies to people who win the awards for Lecturer of the Year and to the very average teacher. 23%. This is really not awesome. Hardly a passing grade. But we've always had this sneaking suspicion that this was true. Because you've probably had this experience. You come up with your best lesson ever. But you have this great idea, okay, I know how to teach this. And then you organize things so carefully, all the details are in place. And then you do the lesson, and you show the students amazing things they never thought were possible. And by the end of it, you are so convinced that you've taught this so well that even monkeys can do this. But I have had a biologist attend my presentations, and I've been corrected. Chimpanzees. But they're holding cigars, they gotta be monkeys, right? Right, even monkeys can do this. You've taught it so well. And then along comes the test, the quiz, the final exam, and they bomb it in epic style. 23%. And we're left wondering, what the heck is going on upstairs? What is it with these students? Why did I ever become a teacher? Well, you may have had this conversation in your staff room. Maybe you've spoken these words yourself. and you're exasperated, and you're wondering, I'm doing my job teaching. Why aren't students doing their job learning? Well, this is an interesting question. What is good teaching? Is it about how well the material is presented? Look at this guy, right? He's dressed for success. He's got the look of authority going on there. Or is it how well are the students learning? And the real question is, how do we answer this question? And our solution is science. We want to use science to help us teach better. And this is why I'm really excited to be here today, because I strongly believe that we are in the midst of a genuine scientific revolution in teaching. The force concept inventory 30 years ago was in the early vanguard of this. And since then, a robust body of research has been developing, helping us to understand learning better and to take a scientific and empirical approach towards teaching. And this is what I want to share with you folks today. So, a scientific revolution in teaching is just the antidote that we need, because it can help defend ourselves against pedagogical fads. I'm sure you've never been subject to those. It can help defend us against the long-standing prejudices that we all carry with us about the nature of learning. And it can help us to overcome the personal inertia that we all have towards changing the way that we teach. And most importantly, this scientific revolution is helping us to ask productive questions. When you get those results back from a quiz or the test, and you're just shaking your head, we can now ask ourselves, well, what is happening in a student's brain when they're learning? And so, this is my proposal. This is what I want to share with you folks today. It is my summary, my distillation of neuroscience, research from the neuroscience of learning, cognitive psychology, the thinking processes that are part of learning, a lot of physics education research, and then a lot of classroom practice where these principles have been implemented. If we put this together, we create what I'm calling is a scientific model of learning. Now, why do scientists model? Well, Albert's ripped. And the reason why scientists create models is because it allows us a framework of ideas that helps us to explain phenomena that we observe and to predict new things that we haven't seen before. And the exciting part for us here today is that this scientific approach now applies to learning. So, let's begin. If we look inside the brain of the average student, we want to explore the physical workings of that brain. So as we zoom in, we see billions and billions of neurons firing rapidly, grouped together, and those neurons have connections, axons and dendrites that spread out from the nucleus of the cell, from the cell body, and make connections with the other neurons in the brain. And as the person grows, develops, and learns, those connections change. This is a fundamental picture of what's happening. And now with advances in imaging technology, we are able to actually see this. The video that you saw there was for neuron cells in petri dishes. But what about in a real live working brain, like the ones in our classrooms? Well, we can see this thanks to magnetic resonance imaging scans. If we scan the brain of a person who is learning a new task or skill, what we'll see is that as time goes by, so number of weeks, the gray matter in the brain actually increases in density. And then if we stop practicing that skill, well, sure enough, the gray matter in those areas of the brain starts to shrink. The brain is incredibly resource intensive. So if you're not using that part, it takes resources from there to put it to where you are. And this provides us with a really valuable picture to help us explain to our students what is going on. Because brain tissue grows in response to use, to exercise, just like the muscles do. A very valuable analogy for our students. Now, this is a long-term picture. We can also take a look at a much shorter-term one. So let's watch the brain learn. So what you see here, highlighted in white, are regions of the brain where there's a lot of extra blood flow. That's where the brain is using more energy in order to do its job, thinking, learning. And here we have 3 successive images showing the brains of a person who is very new to a task, the novice, intermediate, and then skilled. So what I'd like you to do is take a minute with the neighbors at your table and discuss these 2 questions. I would like you to talk about what is happening in these brains. So based on these pictures, what can we infer is happening in the brains? And how do you suppose this feels to the owner or the user of this brain? So we have 1 minute for these discussions. Go. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I'd like to hear a few of your ideas. Please use your gym teacher voice. We're in here. First question, what can we infer is happening in these brains? Please, any thoughts you'd like to share? Experiencing something new for the novice? Thank you. Yes? For the skilled person, clearly the brain is not working as hard. Yes?
The novice is forming a connection.
There's a lot of energy use here. So there's a lot of connections that are being formed. How does this feel to the owners of the brains? Novice versus skilled. Yes?
Well, the skilled brain would feel less tired, I suppose, because less work is being done.
Feel less tired, less energy is being expended, that's for sure. Yes, ma'am? It would feel automatic or even effortless. That's what they see when they observe us performing these skills. They're watching the skilled brain, but they are experiencing the novice brain. So thank you very much for all those ideas. And this is another really important lesson for our students. Learning something new is very energy intensive and tiring. If you're doing your job of learning well, it is a tiring experience. And that's normal, that's natural. But these brain cells are freaking out. And they don't know which ones to fire to in order to get this new job done. And And so they have to do a lot of work trying things out. Oh, no, that doesn't work. And then trying again. And then eventually, you only use the neural pathways which are absolutely necessary to perform these tasks. Skilled brain. So, here's a really important teaching tip for us. Help students understand how their brains work. Read the manual. Well, there's never been a manual, right? We're just starting to understand some of these ideas for the first time. But it's really important that we share these ideas with our students. Now, it's really important because, consider this random toddler from the internet. And babies are such great examples of learning because they seem to learn without discouragement, without giving up. No matter what they're doing, they might stumble and fall an awful lot, but they keep getting back up. And then eventually, it's effortless. You don't think about performing that skill or task anymore. And as students move through the educational system, they start to lose that ability to just keep picking themselves back up. And so we want to remind them that this is such a natural part of the learning process. And if you stick to it, you will become skilled and you'll be doing this effortlessly. Good old babies from the internet. You want more babies? Well, this is my daughter. I know, it's a shameless exploitation of children. So I think this was the moment when she discovered that her father was a physics teacher. That look on her face, clearly, that's it. Now, we have a very strong emotional reaction to babies. That's why we like those YouTube videos. And this is equally an important part of our classroom experience, the role of emotion. Now, we would like to teach, the Spocks of the world. It'd be great if our students were all Vulcans, but the science strongly shows that you cannot separate cognition from emotion. We're stuck teaching here on Earth with these people, and the brains that have evolved with them over millions and millions of years. And these brains have one mission, and that is survival. And they have a vast mental apparatus that helps the brains do that, to survive at all costs. And that's what shows up in our classrooms. So let's take a look at a couple of these mechanisms to help us better understand what's going on. So the names aren't really important here, but there's a region in the back of the brain which is responsible for processing sensory information, the input, so to speak. And this part of the brain sends the information to a part very deep inside. It's an old part of the brain called the amygdala. This part of the brain is responsible for protecting the organism. And it takes its job really seriously. So this is the part of the brain that is associated with emotions of fear and distress. And it's the part that fires up very often when students see, oh no, it's physics. The amygdala is sending out these signals, and the brain is like, holy shit, it's physics. We're shutting down, we're abandoning ship, we're done here. And so those signals go to the front part of our brain, and then the students, you see the lazy look go over their eyes, and they're obviously in their happy place. And this is a survival mechanism. And it's one that is very often triggered and associated with things like math and tests. And if it's repeated, then the body develops a habituated response to this, which is a stress response, or anxiety. Now, anxiety is a big issue in my school. And for years, I personally thought, this sounds made up, this sounds bogus, right? But again, let's take a look inside the brain. This is an example of scans from high math anxiety adults. And the regions in their brain that are activated when they see a math question, regions here, here, and here, are the same ones that are associated with the perception of physical pain. So as far as that brain is concerned, they are experiencing physical pain when you hold up the math question. Which sounds totally crazy, but we know this. Right? We know this feeling. When the needle's about to come, you can feel it in your arm. Except the needle is a math question. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, you know, in high school the math can get pretty complicated. But in this study, the math questions that they were being asked were like this. 7 times 9 minus 15. What's the answer? Come on, quick, quick. So the anxiety kicks in. So we need to be very mindful of the negative emotional experiences that can be created in our classrooms. What's the remedy for this? Well, the brain has another mechanism, another survival mechanism. And the remedy is very much associated with the feeling of success. Now, success is much maligned in the education industry and in society at large, largely because of the trophy and the ribbon people, let's call it. Right, everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets a ribbon. So what happens to that feeling of success? Well, let's take a look at a very different example. So these are from my class. Let's watch the experiences of the students.
Yeah, look at that. Look at that. And then these precise calculations. Good job, good job. Good. Wow. That's really great. Thank you. Whoa. Oh, that hurts.
In those examples, you can see the real visceral response that students have related to success. And so this is my question to you. So how is this type of success different? Talk to your neighbor, please. Go. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Would anybody like to share an idea that you have? How is this different from this ribbon trophy characterization of success? Yes, ma'am. Intrinsic versus extrinsic? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
It's more immediate in time than getting your test back next Wednesday and do well.
It's immediate in time. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, every one of those processes is accompanied by some kind of neural development. So either the neural development is going to be growing or it's going to be returning. And positive experience is going to be growth. That is also the fact that both the cognition and the emotion, positive terms are tied to the development of that neuron.
Thank you very much. So a growing experience, and this is rewarding that growth in the brain. One more, yes.
All those kids are doing.
And the kids were active, they were doing. Great, thank you very much for those ideas. So a lot of the hard work that we do in our classes, the hard work that students do when they learn, happens in the prefrontal cortex. This is where you do a lot of your figuring out stuff. And the prefrontal cortex has a very high distribution of receptors for the brain's happy chemical. That is dopamine. So what you saw there were the kids getting their dopamine hit when they personally recognized that their work, their ideas, the effort that they had put in were useful, and that they bore fruit. And so this is a very valuable model of success because it's intrinsic. The students realize themselves that they are, or they have been successful. So the internal reward system has been activated. So tip number 2 for us as teachers, we need to start planning our lessons around emotions. We can't take that away from our students' learning experience. It cannot be separated from cognition. So students need to find success regularly. So our goal in teaching is to help our students move from that novice brain to the skilled brain. Of course, the question is how? You saw the final results of it in the video there. But how do you develop those skills in the first place? Well, let's take a look. The traditional model of learning goes something kind of like this. You unscrew the student's head, you pour in very carefully developed knowledge and ideas, and then you screw it on really tight. And they've learned. Now, an important question for us from a scientific point of view is, does this model work? Well, here's an example from a physics exam. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you answer the question. But it involves ideas that are very similar to grade 9 electricity, so I thought I'd show it to you. So this is on a first-year physics exam. The students are asked to find the voltage and the current in this particular circuit. Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky-looking circuit. And the results? Well, the students did reasonably well. They scored 75% on this. In the very same exam, a second circuit question was presented. It looked like this. There's no numbers. It's just asking, okay, if we close this switch, highlighted in red, what happens to the current through the battery and the breakers of the bulbs? Now, if you present this question to a physics teacher, they'll say, oh, come on, you can't seriously put this on exam. This is a slam dunk question. When you close the switch, that short circuits the other bulb. Now you only have 2 bulbs instead of 3. The resistance of the circuit drops. Current increases. The brightness increases. But on the exam, the students scored 40% on this. We've taught them all this stuff. Right? We poured in those ideas, screwed on the lid tight. So that model of learning simply doesn't work. It doesn't explain this phenomenon. So we need a new model. And the new model goes something like this. We all store knowledge in pieces, in tiny pieces. And pieces kind of like this. Charges move. If you have more resistance, less moves. Charges carry energy. And then over time, as you learn, you develop stronger connections between these pieces. Each piece might represent thousands and thousands of neurons in the brain. And then eventually forms a vast web of connections. So we believe this is how knowledge is stored in our brains. Now, we call this, that web of knowledge that students bring into our classrooms, we call this their prior knowledge. And so we, you and I, and our students, we make sense of new ideas by connecting them to our prior knowledge. Now, here's a really important lesson for us as teachers, and it's one of the toughest ones. Students cannot make sense of new ideas if their prior knowledge is not ready. They might be able to memorize it, but they won't be able to use it productively because the pieces simply don't fit. And this can be baffling for teachers because you've explained the idea in such a sensible way, but the students are just not getting it. We've experienced that. We've all experienced that. And it's probably because of this. So, as our next tip, we need to help students make connections to their prior knowledge. There's lots of ways of doing this. We have to remind ourselves that their brains are not empty vessels. We can't just pour in our highly refined scientific knowledge that we want them to learn. And that can be very frustrating. because we have a lot of curriculum to get through and time is precious, but it's not the way their brains learn. So, this is our third piece in my proposed scientific model for learning. Well, you've been doing really well so far, so I think it's time for a test. So, what I have here are a series of shapes and numbers. You've got 30 seconds. I want you to learn this pattern of shapes and numbers. I'm going to be testing you on it. This is really important. I want to explain why it's important, but actually I will. It'll be on your next PPA. Okay, so carefully study those. I want to make sure you get a great review. And here we go. Okay, time for our test. Just shout out the answer. The top one is... Come on. The top one is... The next one? 27. Come on. Oh my goodness. What's going on here? Actually, this study it was important. Now, I want you to take 1 minute, again, talk to your neighbors and discuss the patterns that you see in these shapes and numbers. Go. All right, folks. So you've had a chance to discuss some of the ideas there. And let's take a look. What is the pattern? And we have to make up something for the zero. All right. So now, let me give you another test. Okay, here we go. The top one. What's the answer? 23, great, great. The next one, shout it out. 48, great. And the next one, got 15. That was awesome. In the span of about 2 minutes, you went from at-risk students right to the top of your class. And obviously the credit goes to your teacher, right? So, what this needs to remind us of is the fact that quality learning, deep learning, begins with ideas that connect facts. But learning and understanding is all about connections, not isolated pieces of knowledge. So this is a very important takeaway for us. Now, how does the brain make those connections? If we take a look at its operations, we can break down the brain's jobs into about 4 groups or regions, roughly speaking. So you have the back of the brain where you get a lot of input. You get the sides down here where you do a lot of connecting and associating. So you figure out, you make meaning, assign meaning to that input. And then signals go to the front of the brain, your prefrontal cortex. And that's where you do the abstract thinking, the predicting, the planning. And then signals go to the top zone of the brain, which is your motor cortex, and that's where you can do and test things. So in a very fundamental way, this is, we call it the cognitive learning cycle. And this is how the brain is hardwired to learn. Now, it's more complicated than that, but this is the basic schematic of how our brain has evolved in order to figure things out. This is its natural mode of operations. We can map out the connections in the brain. It looks something like this. So, this is our fourth and final piece in our scientific model for learning, the cognitive learning cycle. And the power of the scientific model is its ability to explain and predict. So let me show you an example of teaching and try using this model.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government.
Can you see the learning happening there? Right. So we can see which parts of the cognitive learning cycle are not at all happening there. So using this scientific framework, we have a much better way of understanding in depth and detail why certain teaching might be effective and other teaching might not. Now, if we think about that traditional mode of teaching, let's say you decided, okay, I saw that result on the circuits for the exam, I'm going to teach it better next year. You say, all right, I'm going to explain the electrical concepts really, really well. And then I'll go through some practice examples, some sample circuits, very carefully, highlight all those details. And then I'll give them all the strategies and tips that I've spent years figuring out. But this is the natural instinct of the teacher. But this just shows us how complex learning is and how our instincts are not our best guide when it comes to how students process and learn knowledge. Because all we're doing is providing more and more input for our students. So, lots of input, but very little opportunity to assign meaning to that. Or if you think about your typical homework, a lot of that, if it involves math, or if it involves finding information in a book and reproducing that information over here, that can happen in the prefrontal cortex with very, very little opportunity for active testing of those ideas. If science ideas are useful, then they help us do useful things. They help us make predictions. Students must be doing them. And this is a continuous cycle. It keeps repeating as we learn more and more. So it can be very frustrating because as teachers, we're stuck. All we can do is provide input. And students have to go through all these other steps. We cannot do it for them. They have to make the predictions. They have to test things out. And the tests become the input for the next step in the cycle. And it repeats. This is how our brains are hardwired to learn. And only the student can do those other steps. So teachers can only help. And students themselves have to work through the 4 steps of the cognitive learning cycle. So let me give you an example from our grade 10 science classes at my school. The life cycle of a cell. The biologists in the group are going, okay, finally. Not physics. So this is a lesson that we have them go through. We give the students some input. They have this very simple schematic of a process. And then we ask them simple questions to help them begin to assign meaning to what they see here. How many phases are there? In what order? When does the size change? When does the number change? So give them an opportunity to activate that next part in the cycle. And then we ask a more sophisticated question. If you put the samples under a microscope, how many would you see in each phase? Okay, now we're in the predict and the plan phase. So they make that prediction and then they find a slide. Oh yeah, all these spaghetti ones. Right? I think that's what it's talking about. So they tested it. They have that sense of success. Right? These ideas are already useful for predicting and describing our world. And then the next round of input begins. These strange words, gap, synthesis, mitosis, these mean nothing to students. But now we have paired their prior knowledge so that they have places to attach these strange looking words. And the cognitive learning cycle repeats. Here's another example. You have a zoo. And in the zoo you have squirrels, a largish kind of rodent, and you have the mice, much smaller than the squirrels. And so your challenge is to build an exhibit where, so in this case, the squirrels can't cross from one section of the exhibit to the other, this barrier. The mice can. And another one where the mice cannot cross from one side to the other, but the squirrels can. Take 1 minute and 11 seconds and talk with your neighbors. How would you build an exhibit like this? Just be creative. And what science concepts does this model go? Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So let's hear just a couple ideas. How would you build such an exhibit? Would anybody like to share? Yes, ma'am.
So the first one would be some sort of hole that's small.
Small hole, yeah.
And then we thought that from our prior knowledge that this world can jump, so there'd be something where this world can like jump to get across with like, I don't know, like.
They have to jump a certain gap or something. Okay, great, great. And so you're activating a lot of knowledge that you have about these critters, but we're also constructing a valuable analogy. And analogies are great ways for triggering that prior knowledge that students have. So what is the scientific concept that this models from your biology classes? The permeability of membranes. And if you think about transport across membranes, this is a very foreign world for students. There's very little in the picture here or in the words that have meaning to them. But if you prime their understanding with something that they are familiar with, then they have a place to attach these new ideas to. So this is the power of understanding students' prior knowledge and preparing it. So in our teaching tip, we can expand this. So quality learning takes place when our students are connecting ideas. And the best way to do that is by engaging the cognitive learning cycle. Now, the secret ingredient for activating that cognitive learning cycle is what we call active learning. And in active learning, we emphasize a lot of discussion, higher order thinking, and group work. It's in these situations where, as human beings, we tend to naturally go through these 4 steps of the cognitive learning cycle. And a large meta-study was done 3 years ago that tracked the improvements in learning when students use active learning techniques across a wide range of STEM disciplines. Oh, sorry, that's coming up in just a moment. I want to take a moment to observe this here. It's another example of teaching. And those crazy endocrinologists. They're a wild bunch. I wouldn't go anywhere near that room over there. So this is another example of a learning environment. And I want you to listen as best you can to what they're saying and try to observe what is happening here. So, there's it was a very quick example, and I'm not sure if you could hear much of their conversation. It's a bit oomy. But do you think learning is taking place there? We've got a lot of discussion going on. You can see the students moving and pointing and doing things. Now, you might be interested to know that this situation is actually our physics exam. So our physics exam begins with 10 or 15 minutes of discussion. Students hash out the ideas, and then they adjust their seating and they get their individual papers. So we can take advantage of the cognitive learning cycle in almost any educational setting, even something as stuffy and traditional as an examination. So, now getting back to where I was going before. In this meta-study that collected data about the efficacy of active learning strategies, they found that a vast number of these studies show reduced failure rates. They show increased performance on traditional tests, exams, or standardized tests that researchers have developed. And we can see that's the case across a wide range of STEM disciplines. So the dashed red line represents the normal performance. And these values are the performance of students in classes with active learning taking place. So across a wide range of disciplines and education, there we are in physics, leading the pack. So it turned out that as a discipline, physicists were some of the first to turn to empirical scientific methods for improving learning, improving teaching. And that's the reason why I'm here with a lot to share with you folks, because of the 30 years of hard work that's come from this community. In my own classes, I use the force concept inventory to track my students' performance. And this is the data. If you remember the value of 23% from the typical classroom that is taught in a traditional way, students at our school, if it's me teaching or if it's a colleague teaching, they're scoring gains of 57%. So in a real empirical way, they're learning more than twice as much as students at other schools who are taught in a traditional way. Should we double ourselves? So we have a lot of evidence to support the efficacy of active learning techniques. So here are the main takeaways for us. What matters most in our classrooms is not the show that the teacher puts on at the front. It's what happens inside our students' heads. And the more we focus on this as educators, the more successful our students will become. And teachers can't tell students what they're supposed to know. This is really frustrating for us, because we have so much to share. And we're nice people, we want to share it. But we're kind of like that person at the party who has too much to share, and they're just going on. We have to learn to take a step back, because it's the students who have to explore the ideas, construct the ideas, test them, and refine them. That is the way that they will develop a deep understanding. Otherwise, it's just memorized. So what is good teaching? Is it how well the material is presented? Well, if that's all that's going on, then absolutely not. Like, good teaching is really about how well our students are learning. And the scientific evidence strongly supports this. Now, teachers need to learn too. That's one of the reasons why you're here today, aside from hanging out with your friends and so on. So what I encourage you to do is look up this book, How People Learn. The great thing is, if you Google it, it's available free from the National Research Council of the United States. Just download the PDF. Another very helpful book is The Art of Changing the Brain. So this book describes the cognitive learning cycle in much more detail than I did today. And it's just kind of amazing as a physics teacher, just how useful biology can actually be for what I do in my classroom. It's quite simple. So you learn a lot about the biology of the brain and how it does its job of learning. I encourage you folks to come on out and check out our physics teacher conference in May at Western University. We are leaders in active learning pedagogy. So in our workshops, you will be active, you will be doing things, and you will learn an awful lot about ways to use that cognitive learning cycle. And okay, Jeff, that's getting embarrassing. And I always have an open invitation. If you'd like to visit my classroom, just email me, and we'll set up a date. I don't do anything fancy for visitors. You come and you see a very ordinary classroom. You can go to my website and download this presentation, which gives you all the scientific citations and so on. And you can download the resources that my school uses. And the most important thing is that you stop teaching and you help your students to learn. Thank you very much, everybody. Now, I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but you're welcome to stick around and ask questions. Yeah, we're just about done here. So I'll be around to answer any questions if you have any. So thank you very much for coming today, folks.
So the collaborative part before your exam, what are they doing at that point?
They have a version of the exam question
Okay.
without numbers.
Okay.
And so they discuss the ideas.